We'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting for Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mr. Legess?
Present.
Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Byrne? Ms. Weber? Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Parker? Mr. Kinzinger?
Present.
Mr. Zenz?
Present.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson? Ms. Zucolo? Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Mr. Seroy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no request for public comment. Are there any requests for public comment? Seeing no request for public comment, we have no presentations today. We'll move to the amendments. The amendments have been distributed. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Hess moves. Mr. Payton seconds. Any discussion on approval of the minutes? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The Treasurer's Office, Mr. Afficano. Good morning.
Good morning.
You have the reports in front of you. May I have a motion to combine and approve the reports? Mr. Washington, Mr. Zinn seconds. Is there any discussion on combining and approving the reports? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Good morning.
Let's put it on.
I'm gonna keep this short. Shouldn't last more than half an hour. So, I thought I'd get a little laugh. I handed out a flyer. I tried to get everybody one, which is explains the program that we're doing for taxes. I will say that it's been pretty busy. A fair amount of people have signed up. I still think people are learning about it and will sign up. I'm looking for about 1,000 people, so if that would be a great goal this time around. I don't have anything other than that. I did mention, I did speak with Mr. Kinzinger before the meeting about some changes to a report, my report to the Finance Committee, which I think would make it better, and I'll talk with Andy and Steve McCarty about that and see if we can't make those changes. Other than that, I would entertain any questions, and that's all I have.
Looks like you may be off the hook. All right, thank you. We move to the Finance Department, Mr. McCarty. You have the miscellaneous reports in front of you, so you may want to peruse those as he's coming up. Good morning.
Do you want me to sit over here since I'm sick? Or?
Doesn't matter. Yeah, that would work.
Good morning. Yeah, I apologize right now for any outbursts here. I've got all kinds of medication flowing in me, so hopefully it'll do its job. And I won't fall asleep on you when keep me from coughing. Good morning. Should have in front of you updated monthly reports. It was a nice change this month in sales tax. In total, was one of the highlights there, but I'll let you browse through the activity going on.
Are there questions on the financial reports? In addition to a little surprise and nice surprise in terms of sales tax, anything else special you'd call attention to?
Not at this point. That was one of the
All right.
nice surprises when that stuff shows up online. So.
Then let's move ahead to cash flow update.
The cash flow report is going to look a little different this month. We're going to have to spend a little bit of time here talking about the federal government shutdown, and you might be surprised as why are we going to be talking about it. A few weeks ago, we found out that our federal marshal and DHS federal programs are involved in the shutdown. And what that means for us right now anyway is our receivables for the monthly billing are not being processed at the federal level. So there much discussion internally with Chairman Wheeler, and we took a look at, you know, what this last 30 days, 60 days, whatever the last 4 to 6 months. So what you have before you in the fiscal year 2019 cash flow analysis is a 4 to 6 month scenario. And then we had to look at, okay, what would it take for us to get, you know, through this and then get to our property tax cycle as our next major revenue cash flow item and stream. So that discussion led to an increased line of credit discussion, and what we're here today to discuss what we'll do the next on the agenda for the tax anticipation warrants would be to expand you know, the tax anticipation warrants and add a line of credit to help us cash flow this right now. On a 31-day month, the billing between those two agents, or the agencies, the federal marshals and DHS, is approximately $1 million a month of cash flow. So that adds up pretty quickly. If this
May I interrupt?
extends out.
When was the last failed receipt that we got from the feds?
We have all of November except for DHS, which is about $400,000. So we have one item from leftover from November that did not get processed before, apparently before the shutdown in December and the holidays. So through January, if you look at the line of credit line, November through January, we're going to be about 2.4 million. You know, if we get completed into February for December, January, and then the one item left over for November.
Now, were there some smaller federal grants that we're also not receiving in addition to those?
There are some other grants that those happen on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
So that, you know, that certainly is not something to ignore, but it's not on this level of dollar amounts, you know, that's going to affect us. And at this point, you know, the state continues to process, you know, all of the other things besides the, you know, any grant going through the state continues the process. So we'll continue to watch, you know, that. Hopefully that nothing gets affected there. The federal workforce funds are flowing. Those is so there's, it's kind of hit or miss. It's quite interesting trying to figure all this out, of what's flowing and not flowing. But so
your recommendation in terms of total line of credit tax anticipation warrants you'd ask for our approval would be what?
yeah, well, that would be in the next next item, and that
Okay.
would be 2 pages back.
All right, well, I'll let you finish up then on
Yeah,
this cash flow.
it kind of leads into that. So, so basically, the line of credit, the additional line of credit, above and beyond what we talked about last month of the 2.5 million, which we're going to call normal at this point, we would take, you know, as needed, and potentially add basically $4 to $4.5 million if, you know, it runs, you know, if we have to go through March or April into this, you know, with the amount of billing and such. So Through the conversations, I've had a lot of great conversations with local banks, specifically 4 of which we're still working on. This is a work in progress. It does take time for the banks to go through their process, supply them with information. I'll let you know that what was better received, talking to bond counsel and all this, like, you know, okay, how are these going to be structured? What are we going to call them? What, you know, the backup of it, the collateral, because they're a federal billing, you know, they have revenue anticipation warrants out there, but our tax anticipation warrants were better received than the revenue anticipation warrants. So our backing of our property tax cycle, I thought that was very interesting. Note in that communication that there's still a little bit of uneasiness out there, you know, even when you're talking about the federal government. So so this is an expansion of our tax anticipation warrant. Again, talking to bond counsel, we looked at expanding the corporate and the tort levy amount, and to maximize the amount, and to also do this and open this up so that the board does this hopefully just one time in a vote, and, you know, opens the window up enough that we can work within that and only take what we need and pay it off, you know, obviously when the Fed programs open back up. That's kind of the background and the thought process and some of the communication that we've had. So unless there's questions on this specific report, you also have FY18 actual, you have December actual, you know, as far
Well,
as
let's pause for a
flows.
minute.
But
Are there questions on this report? Mr. Kissinger, just a minute. Let's see, you're number 10.
Yes. Just getting my head around what you said. The 2.5 million is anticipated, and the 1.9 is the additional money due to the federal government shutdown. Is that correct? Or have I got that incorrect?
yeah, let me go over it. The tax anticipation line, I didn't change it. The 2.5 million would be what we were normally going to do.
Yes.
Without this other additional conversation. Right above it there, following the line of credit,
Oh, it's 2.4.
the 2.4 would be for November to January billing, and then if we had to, the February March billing, you have approximately $1.9 million to $2 million. So the line of credit would be the additional amount on the report,
So the line of credit is
$4 to $4.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
So second question, are we still accepting federal inmates and digging a deeper hole every month?
I believe that's a question for the sheriff, but I believe that process
Sheriff?
continues as it has.
His answer was yes.
Does he
Sheriff,
recommend we continue doing that?
Sheriff, would you recommend, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry.
I would highly recommend we continue to do that for obvious reasons. If we make any changes in revenue coming in, we just have expenses, at least for 60 days. So we'd be shooting ourselves in both feet if we stop the program while we're waiting for the shutdown to stop.
I'm just talking about new inmates, not existing.
Well, we only have them for a short period of time, so it's a constant.
Roll.
It's a roll. You know, I would say, you know, the marshals may be here a little bit longer, but I mean that's a little over half. So it's I guess what this does is it emphasizes that we were by far not out of the hole, and until you have $5, $6, $8 million in the bank, you're always borrowing against next year's tax revenue. You're always interfund borrowing until a surplus is only a surplus once you can get through the tax cycle season. So this hit us right as we became cash poor. Even more so, we were still in a deficit situation, not even with a surplus. So this couldn't have happened at a worse time for us. Even with the great position we were in, our payables are now expanding. But if we don't wait for this that's why I asked Steve, we got to run the numbers. What does this mean for us? When do we not meet payroll based on our really only revenue model outside of property taxes is this program or these programs? So I just want to make sure that that's clear. I mean, if we send everybody home right now, we've still got 60 days of expenses, and that would be devastating to us.
In a deal like this, you always have to look at the exit strategy. We're set through April. All of us in this room think that that shutdown will be stopped. However, when I hear Steve mention that the bonding company would rather look at our tax anticipation warrants than this other item, they must have some kind of exit strategy. I just encourage everybody to think about an exit strategy.
I think that's a good point. There has already been some discussion in terms of even a worst-case scenario, but at this point, as I understand the recommendation from the Finance Department, this would be what they think would be the wisest thing to do, and we can revisit it at a later time if necessary.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Yes.
this gets us until roughly October or November because the property tax cycle takes over. So this is for, if this lasts basically a year.
This 4.9 million is not through April. That's when I need the last of it, just to take us.
Then property taxes come in.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
Yes, it
And
helps.
Steve would
It helps.
confirm that. That's why we want to look at what gets us till a year down the road.
so we've got several months to review this. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I did run a model all the way out that said, okay, what if this is 8 to 10, you could scenario this forever, but, longer out and the property taxes will carry us as well, so, if that worst case scenario, then there'll have to be additional conversation for sure going on, if it gets into 8 to 10 month category. This is a 4 to 6 month, discussion, gets us through our most difficult time of year for cash flow, then we'll obviously continue to watch it and continue to adjust it as needed, but at least this is getting us through a 4 to 6 month window, worst case scenario at this point.
Other questions? Seeing none, where would you go next?
Then the tax anticipation warrant page is the next one. This will need a vote to move on to the full board. I had a draft resolution, however, without the exact commitments yet from the banks that we're working with, we felt it wiser to just bring a summary at this point with what we know, and if the finance committee agrees and recommends to the full board to expand the dollar amount for the tax anticipation warrants, and then what the ordinance from bond council will do, we'll take those expanded numbers and plug into the specifics as those become available, and the banks know that February 11th is the board meeting, and that we're working towards and trying to get everything locked in by. But they are working on their end as well. So working with bond council, we expanded for this purpose the corporate levy to not to exceed the $4,126,750, and then the tort purpose not to exceed amount of $3,153,500. So the total not to exceed amount we would be opening the tax anticipation warrants up for would be $7,280,250. So that's to allow for this additional line of credit as the information becomes available. We do know, so I left in the original amount that we talked about, last month, and it's still, good to go, that, the split between People's Bank and Homestar Bank for the original TAW of 2.5 million. So that still will happen and continue and flow the same way. The additional line of credit, the $4,780,250, will be looked at as a short-term line of credit and used as needed, and then paid back immediately once the federal funds can start flowing again. So that's how this will break down. Right now, the interest rate we're dealing with, that we know about with Homestar and Peoples is 3.5%. We'll see if there's other interest rates that come into play with the additional amount or not. And then we're looking at still looking at an estimated closing date around February 20th or so. So if this goes long term, all of it, everything would fall underneath the repayment term 45% in due in early July, and then 55% the remaining due at the end of September, which follows the property tax cycle. However, you know, that would be worst case scenario of the federal payments. That will flow as far as the 2.5 million. Again, we'll pay down the other as soon as we can, if we end up taking it. So so that's what we know right now. I was hoping, and we tried to get, you know, as much information to you today as we could, but you know, this takes time as we're working with some large dollar amounts with the banks. But it's been very good conversation, and I do feel confident about it. But I don't have any specifics yet, and I don't want to put those out there until we know that for sure.
Questions? Seaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, do you think the banks will split that, or do you think one will grab one and we're gonna play the interest rate game?
I
hope.
think either one could happen at this point, you know, that one takes it, or there could be a split between, yeah, a couple. So
Do you know what current interest rates are? If 3.5, I know 3.5 is a good rate, but if we increase our amounts, do you think it could get down to the 3.3 or 2 range?
I don't have any indication of that yet,
Okay.
to be able to share.
It's kind of guaranteed money. I mean, we think, you know,
And
we
there's also,
hope it's guaranteed.
there's also a side of this that we're working on and trying to find that the feds will owe us interest as well. The delay payment. We have received interest from them in the past for when they get beyond. So we're trying to find all the, you know, and match up like.
All right, so what's that interest rate that they normally pay?
That's what we're trying to find. So
Okay.
we will get some interest out of this now. I don't know if it'll wash, but there is some that we'll receive from all this.
All right, thank you, sir.
Other questions? Are we ready for a motion? Could we have a motion to approve this proposed tax anticipation warrant program? Ms. Fiddle? And Mr. Yes for the second. Any discussion on the motion? We'll need a roll call vote on the motion for tax anticipation warrants.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Legess.
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zucolo, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the next item, the actuarial evaluation study.
You have a contract in your packet with from Menard Consulting Incorporated for an actuarial.
Actually, did we find that in
Study.
the packet? Did you,
Oh, it's not.
was that in the packet? Oh, it's out of order?
Oh, it's out of order.
Okay.
So sorry. I've had this all weekend, so my apologies if I. This is related to the annual audit. This information goes into the annual audit. We are required to do a study of this sort every 2 years. This is for post-employment benefits estimates that go into the annual audit. So this actuary gives us future estimates of the valuation of any post-employment benefits. We don't have a lot as a county, but there are some out there, and so this is a required item. We brought for review, and Chairman Wheeler wanted everybody to see this before we engage them. We did do a bid for services a couple years ago, and our consulting came in. It's the lowest. This one is a couple $100 higher. There's a few changes. it's going from GASB 45 to GASB 75, additional, a few different things. So there's a $200 fee, but there's also, if we decide to choose it, an offer out there for the fiscal year 2020 valuation as well to be the same amount if we choose to do that. So it's pretty straightforward. They're been good to work with. So we just wanted to bring this for your review and blessing if there's any questions.
Mr. Kissinger.
Menard Consulting Incorporated Actuaries and Consultants, I'm not familiar with them. Are they a recognized public pension or actuary firm? I do a lot of
For
this kind of work.
for this kind of activity, yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Do you know about how often we have to do this?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years? Any other questions? All right, if there are no other questions, a motion to approve actuarial evaluation study would be in order. Mr. Kissinger, is there a second? Mr. Carnell? Question?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Is this a recommendation for the single year or to go with the both, to lock in the rate for the second one in 2020? Or was it 21? There's an offer here, correct? Yeah, there's two on here. Are we going for just the one, or do you want to lock in so we do the next one as well at the same rate?
What's your
Is
recommendation?
that
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I would recommend doing it for both if the committee's comfortable with that.
All right. And the second agrees with that this is for both years. Any other questions or discussion? A roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Legess, Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess, Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, Mr. Zenz, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Ms. Zucolo, Mr. Wheeler, motion carries.
All right, we move to property tax abatement for tax year 2018.
Yeah, there was a single page. This is an item that has to be done every year. This Series 2007 GEO bond for the county health department is will need to be abated, as it says the debt service payments for the following bond issues to be abated in their entirety from Kankakee County tax levy for tax year 2018 payable in 2019. So this is something that annually has to be done.
Any questions? A motion to approve the property tax abatement for the bond on the county health department would be in order. Mr. Payton, is there a second? Mr. Zen, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, roll call vote would be in order.
Mr. Lear, Mr. Legess, Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess, Mr. Payton, Mr. Kinzinger, Mr. Zenz, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Ms. Zucolo, Mr. Wheeler, motion carries.
Claims recommended or not recommended for approval?
We have none at this for this month.
Okay,
That's all
so
I had, unless there's other questions.
we have no need to take any action then at that point. All right, is there any other questions for Mr. McCarty? Hearing none, we'll move on to the Sheriff's Department. Thank you very much. Sheriff Mike Downey. You have in front of you one item, his monthly update was. We'll need that from the sheriff first. Good morning.
Good morning. So, obviously, we talked about the government shutdown, with still no end in sight. For those of you that may recall, We did have a government shutdown back in 2013. It didn't last near as long, but we have gone through this before. We do not have the interest rate as to what they pay when they are late. We could call up there, but there's nobody up there to answer the phone. So we cannot get the interest rate, but as Steve mentioned, they do pay interest. And let's hope that something happens in the very near future, and a lot of this talk that we've heard already can go away. So one of the things that we brought up at the criminal justice meeting was the number of people that are getting released from the Illinois Department of Corrections back to our community. And in December, that number was 91. And for those wondering about recidivism, and the national average of recidivism is that 68% of those released will recommit an offense and be rearrested within 3 years. Approximately half of that 68% will be rearrested in the first year of their release. So obviously that has an impact on us and our community, and what affects our local population. So just to kind of keep that in mind from a financial standpoint. Obviously, those that get released do have access to parole officers and other programs, and we at the Sheriff's Office also participate in some reentry stuff for those that require or are in need of some services. So there are services out there. Sometimes those services work and sometimes they don't. So questions on that? As you saw by Steve's report, our number in December rather, our housing number increased by $138,000 for December 2018 compared to 2017. Our projected number in January so far, if we ever get paid, will be $156,000 better than January of last year. So going into February, we'll be approximately $300,000 to the good based on the number that we brought in last year. And as I try to constantly remind everybody, at some point those numbers will level off. And if you look at pretty much March through the end of the year, those numbers are fairly high, and I can't see us going much higher than that because quite simply we don't have any beds. So just to kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at the numbers that we have. This increase in the first 2 months of the year is not going to continue. So just kind of keep that in mind. Questions on that? And lastly, the second thing on our agenda is...
If I might.
Oh.
As we prepared the budget, I think we made some recognition that we expected things to level off, didn't we?
Well, last year we anticipated that we would bring in 8.7, I believe, and this year I think we're anticipating 10. So yeah, I mean we have not done what we have done in the past a while back, where because we brought in 10 million this year, we're automatically going to bring in 11 million next year, and then 11 million and 12 million and so on. So fortunately, we've wisened up to that fact that we only have so many beds, and so yeah, we did. To answer your question, we did anticipate that. The other thing on the agenda is a declaration of surplus vehicles. I saw somebody's packet that had the orders signed by the judge. These cars are a 2001 Chevrolet Monte Carlo and a 2002 GMC Envoy. They have gone through all the legal processes under Article 36 for seizures, and they are of no use to our department. I don't think they're much use to anybody, and they will, with your approval, will be sent down to the auction.
Questions? Mr. Hess, did you have a question?
Just the date on the one. On the first one, it's dated 12/18/19.
On the court order?
Yeah.
Go talk to, I don't even know who's signing. I don't even know what judge that is.
I don't know either.
I think they were a doctor. You can't read it.
So I don't know,
I'll-
who would be responsible?
I'll make the motion that we make them surplusy.
All right, there's a motion, second by Mr. Legis. Any other discussion? This is a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. And who would be responsible for correcting that Scribner's error?
The judge, the court.
All right, who will contact them, I guess, is what we need to,
I will.
No,
I can.
the other one,
Thank
one's
you.
1219, one's 1218.
It's actually, we'll probably contact the state's attorney's office, have them take care of it,
All
because
right.
that's what they do, so.
right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
That's all I got.
Yes, Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff, just so you know in advance, yesterday at the executive meeting, we discussed the gun sanctuary county. And I requested that be put on this criminal justice committee for next month
Okay,
for discussion,
okay,
viewpoints, whatever.
all right.
Just a little heads up so you know in advance.
Any other questions, comments? If not, thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
The auditor's office, Mr. Lee. Morning.
Mr. Chairman. Okay.
You have the report in front of you. Are there some comments you'd like to make?
Just a few. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just wanted to highlight a few of the items that we have for recommendations. One is that the rate for business travel reimbursements has gone up. We've already seen some claims come through that were calculated at the 0.545, and so it's a obvious recommendation that that we use the higher rate, just so that people be aware of that. We do send those claims back with notes as to what the correct amount is on or before, or excuse me, on or after the 1st of January of 2019, and so that's an item of interest. We did have conversations with a company called Azavar, and they've been in business about 22 years. And what their expertise is, Azavar Government Solutions, is to analyze utility bills, cable bills, things like that, because governmental entities tend to overpay things based on the fact that the addresses that the franchise fees are associated with are often not in the correct counties and things of that nature. So it's very detailed, very involved. They've created technology and software solutions that will use our data to analyze this and come up with what they're going to go after these utility companies and so forth to get reimbursed for things that we spent money on that wasn't ours to spend. For example, it may have been associated with Will County or Iroquois or what have you. So after speaking with them and being walked through the cable franchise or revenue fees and the utility fees, et cetera, and we spoke to several municipalities and counties to kind of get their experience, and they come well recommended with that program. They're a member of the Illinois Government Finance Officers Association, and this contingency audit would be structured, and like with anything, you go in with your eyes wide open. You read the contract carefully. There was a municipality that did not do so, and there were things in the contract that they signed that became a disagreement later on. So I obviously recommend that we read the contract carefully. We send it through the CivDiv of the SAO to ensure that there's nothing that would be put in there that we don't want to be responsible for. And basically what happens is whatever revenue they're able to identify and go after these companies for collecting, they take a percentage of that revenue, and that's their business model, so to say. Their rate is 45%, but we know that all things are negotiable. And so, if they don't find anything, they don't charge anything. That's why it's a contingency audit. So this is potential revenue that we won't see because we don't have the capacity and, frankly, as far as we can tell, the expertise to do what they've been doing for over 2 decades. So that's our recommendation, and it would require logistically, though, some coordination from the administration and the finance department. But I've been told by the counties that we spoke with and the municipalities we've spoken with that the personnel impact is very, very minimal. They do all of the grunt work. It's just a matter of pulling the original documents and things like that, answering some questions. So there's a small impact from what we're told, but everyone I spoke to spoke very highly of them. So I thought that the committee would be interested in that. And then, the other things are continued recommendations. We believe in a forensic audit, so we do recommend that. And then the statutory functions of the office, we continue to recommend that. So other than that, the claims report has been emailed to everyone. And, those items have come through the recommendation process and so forth. So I guess I can take any questions if there are any. Otherwise,
Mr. Kinzinger?
I appreciate your checking into this company and recommend highly that we consider doing that, and that the 45% rate is probably fair. How do we proceed if we want to do something like that?
I think it's true that this process was completed or carried through several years ago. The time lapse is something that maybe we would work with the chairman and see whether there's been enough time that's transpired since they did it the last time to justify doing it again.
Well, it would be more a function of what agreements have been signed by the county in the interim rather than past time, because as I understand the way these systems work, the only cost is gathering information, so that I still recommend that it be reviewed very carefully.
Okay. Mr. McCarty?
Just an FYI for the committee that we did do a utility audit similar. We'd have to look up the company. I don't know if it's the same company. 2012, 2013 area. We went through a very thorough thing. Most of what they found, we shut off a lot of phone lines that we found were not in use. But a lot of the rates, like AT&T rates, things of that nature, there was not a lot of adjustment in as far as rates and items like that. But it's something that we could look at as far as how often do we want to look at something like that?
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for those. Let's deal with the claims report in case there's any questions there.
Okay.
Could we have a motion to accept the monthly report? Mr. Washington, is there a second? Mr. Swanson? Any questions on the motion to accept the monthly report on claims? If there are no questions, a voice vote is in order, so all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you very
okay.
much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a good day, everyone.
All right. We move to the DevNet software contract renewal. Who would speak to this? Mr. Chairman, is that yours?
Yeah, I guess I can, the brief explanation. I believe Eric brought this to Community Services. The terms are in the contract itself. I was just reading those again to make sure they were accurate. It's on page, looks like 17 and 18. Basically, it's the DevNet, which is the system that all those offices down on the first floor basically use together, And so it's just the new agreements. I asked him to go back and renegotiate this and stretch out the costs. He did negotiate a better price. He's a tough negotiator. So, but anyway, you see the rates there that comes recommended from Community Services. So it's just something we have to do to keep that license agreement going. So,
Mr. Kissinger.
The only concern I would have, it is a 5-year software contract. I know there was some talk that we, coming to the end of a mistake we made, we need to coordinate so that our end times equal the other software, so that we could put things together. I don't know if we're close yet, but I know we're getting in the range.
this will get us halfway there.
Halfway? We got another 10 years of that? Oh my God. Okay, fine.
Any other questions, comments? A motion to approve the contract renewal then, Mr. Lejaz, is there a second? Mr. Zen, any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, this is a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Lejess, Mr. Washington, Mr. Hess, Mr. Payton, Mr. Kinzinger, Mr. Zenz, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Ms. DeColo, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
We move to the revised travel expense form. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Since the mileage has changed, we obviously need to have a new form out there for people to fill out. So all forms go through finance and the full board. So we can get this into the policy procedure manual, we email this out. So I recommend that we adopt this. On December 14th is when the IRS released this new rate. So this form came in as a recommendation from the auditor's office in January. So we had to bring it before this committee before it could go to the rest of the departments. My only recommended change would be there's people know that the rate comes from the IRS, would be to strike that line that says mileage reimbursement rate be the mileage rate established by the IRS, publication 463 and 535. Seems extraneous, but besides that, I would make a motion to recommend the approval in that manner.
Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Zen seconds. Any discussion on approving the expense form as amended? Hearing no discussion, this is a voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Is there any old business that needs to come before the committee? Is there any new business needs to come before the committee? Mr. Lejess.
Before the committee members leave, some people missed second page on one or two of these, so check them before you leave, so we get everybody's signature.
Signature sheets.
Okay, make sure you get the signatures correct then.
Do you need a
Yes,
motion to
Mr.
adjourn?
Yes?
I like to, let's get out of here.
Is there
I
a
make
second?
a
Mr.
motion.
Hess seconds. All in favor say aye.
All right.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.